The Boston Tea Party is one of the major turning points in the world because it gave birth to a new country. To start off with, we will need to understand how it all began with the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, began in 1756 and ended in 1763. An imperial war fought by Britain and France, a race for control of mainland North America. Fast forward to 1763 and the war ends with the Treaty of Paris, meaning that France had to give up all territory in North America. Mother Britain won, but with a huge financial consequence. The British government reasoned that since the war was fought in North American colonies, they had to pay. How, you may ask? You guessed it, taxes. The British Parliament passed a series of taxes to the American colonies. They first began with the Stamp Act of 1765. The Stamp Act imposed taxes on newspapers and legal documents, just to mention a few. The American colonies didn't understand how the British were passing these laws, and so a slogan began to arise in the colonies known as "No taxation without representation." Skip a few years, and in 1773, tea is now a major factor in daily lives of an American colonist. The British took advantage of this and introduced the Tea Act. The Tea Act states that tea could only be acquired from the British East India Company, which they heavily taxed. The colonists weren't very pleased, and so they started smuggling their own tea. When the British found out, they were troubled, and so they started to suppress this action. After this aftermath, a colonial activist group known as the Sons of Liberty started to rise up. It's taxation. A few highly regarded members of this society were Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, and Benjamin Rush. They revolved around the idea of no taxation without representation. They were very angry at the Tea Act, which was really just a summit of past taxes the British inflicted after the French and Indian War. One ferocious night, after a babbling meeting, a small number of members dressed up as Native Americans ran and created commotion throughout the streets of Boston, and ascended some British ships and started dumping around 340 chests filled with tea as an act of protest against the Tea Act. This night was known as the Boston Tea Party. A major outcome of this outrageous and rebellious act led the British Parliament to pass the Coercive Acts. These were Britain's most relentless laws, mainly directed to the consequences of the Boston Tea Party. It was more of a warning to the rest of the colonies to stay behaved as well. Basically, what really antagonized the colonists was the removal of the government in Massachusetts, which was replaced with a British Army rule. This additionally infuriated the already angry colonists, but in a piffling 3 years since the Boston Tea Party occurred, an all-out American Revolution would be started, and with the victors being the 13 colonies, a new country would be born, named the United States of America, which would further be one of the top countries in the world at some point. Before we end the video, I would like to announce just a few facts of the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party took place on Thursday, December 16, 1773. The word bohemian was commonly used as a slang term from tea. From all the chests dumped at the Boston Tea Party, 46 tons of tea have made nearly 19 million cups of tea. The casualty that happened in the incident of the Boston Tea Party happened to John Crane, who was knocked unconscious by a falling crate, and then he was carried to the docks by his friends and then woke up the next day. Benjamin Franklin actually volunteered to repay all the tea. The term Boston Tea Party wasn't known until 1834, and before that time the incident was referred as the destruction of tea. After the East India Company reported its losses after the Boston Tea Party, $1 million in today's money would have been lost. An effect of British tea being boycotted, the American tradition of drinking coffee was increased. In 1768, colonists consumed almost around 2 million pounds of tea. The 3 million inhabitants in the American colonies were consuming an average of 2 or 3 cups every day. There was also many follow-up Boston Tea Parties. One of America's hugest revolutionary figure, George Washington, condemned the Boston Tea Party. Around 45 tons of tea, equivalent to 90,000 pounds of tea in 342 containers, were thrown overboard. 116 people participated in the destruction of tea, aka Boston Tea Party. Each full container were almost 400 pounds. Half containers were 100 pounds each. The names of the 3 BTP ships were Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver.